The 4-year rule is now no more. It's going to become the 10-year rule. Historically, what would happen is that only for houses, so dwelling houses, not flats, just houses, the 4-year rule is when someone does something to their property without planning permission. So, I don't know, like a rear extension, or the changes to the windows, or they changed their roof, or they added something else. Whatever they did that needed planning permission, they did without planning permission. Now, normally you would need to submit 4 years of evidence to show that. So when you submit your application, you'd say more than 4 years ago, this happened, and this is the evidence to show it, photos, contracts, emails, whatever. You need to show 4 years. Now that is changing to 10 years. So that basically means now that it's a much more onerous thing. And if you think, keeping evidence for 4 years is one thing, but keeping evidence for 10 years is a whole different ballgame. If you want to learn more about the planning process and how you can unlock value out of any property, click the link below to learn more. So I've been getting a lot of questions about the Levelling Up and Regeneration bill that was received royal assent on the 26th of October. There's a lot of changes in it that a lot of people are wondering what it means for them, what it means for their development plans, what it means for their houses or their properties that they have. It's true that there are a lot of changes, and in my career, there seems to have been a lot of change in the last year, or in the last 2 years really, that's happened in those 2 years than there has in my whole career previous. It's clear that something's changing. It's no secret that the planning system is failing. It's not delivering enough housing, so the government are doing whatever they can to speed up that process to deliver more housing, because it's, as we all know, it's at a critical stage, or beyond critical really. It started with changes to PD, permitted development rights, and that is having a big effect. But now the government has now passed a new law. It's going to make fundamental changes to certain things in the planning system that you will need to know. Now, the first thing to know before we get into this, I'm going to walk through the six things that I think most people should know about. But what you need to know about this right now is that it has received royal assent. It is law, but it does not mean that as of right now, these have come into effect. Because for this to take effect, there has to be a whole bunch of secondary legislation passed before it becomes acted on in everyday life. So I don't know how long that period is going to be. So you need to keep your finger on the pulse as to what's happening, and I'll do my best with videos to do that. But that's what's happened. So this is basically a moment to say everything's about to change. Get ready. What everyone's experience with the planning system, how they submit planning applications, how they go through, how they use certificate of lawfulness, enforcement, things like that, even plan making, so planning policies. There's all going to be changes to that. So it's going to be happening. I don't know if it's going to happen quickly or slowly, but it is going to happen. So it will pay to really keep your ears to the ground with this. So we'll go through the 6 things. Now, the first thing is, I've already started receiving questions about this, is the 4-year rule. The 4-year rule is now no more. It's going to become the 10-year rule. Historically, what would happen is that only for houses, so dwelling houses, not flats, just houses, the 4-year rule is when someone does something to their property without planning permission. So, I don't know, like a rear extension, or the changes to the windows, or they changed their roof, or they added something else. Whatever they did that needed planning permission, they did without planning permission. Now, normally you would need to submit 4 years of evidence to show that. So when you submit your application, you'd say more than 4 years ago, this happened, and this is the evidence to show it, photos, contracts, emails, whatever. You need to show 4 years. Now that is changing to 10 years. So that basically means now that it's a much more onerous thing. And if you think, keeping evidence for 4 years is one thing, but keeping evidence for 10 years is a whole different ballgame. It requires a hell of a lot of organisation. And it's basically, what it's doing is it's stopping people using the 4-year rule to their benefit. The 4-year rule was used over and over again by people think, I only need to build something and then wait out 4 years, hope for the best, and then in 4 years' time I can apply it and it can all be regulated. 10 years is a much longer time frame. It's harder to get through. People might complain, and the enforcement department might get on your back in that time, and keeping your records is going to be really, really tough. So the 4-year rule is going to become the 10-year rule. If you were about to use an application to demonstrate 4 years, I suggest getting your applications in now, very, very quickly, before anything really changes with regards to the secondary legislation I was talking about. So The 4-year rule is becoming the 10-year rule. That's a big one you need to know about. The second one is design codes. Now this is, I don't think this is really being picked up as is to its kind of impact. The design codes is, every council is going to have to create a design code, which basically says, in these areas, we accept these certain things. We want to protect these certain things. Now, how that is being portrayed is, the government is very design oriented. We want beautiful places, and that may be true. But what the design codes, I think, are really trying is that they are trying to hold councils to account to say you can't keep refusing applications in certain areas that are acceptable. This area is fine, but the council in certain instances will identify something in that area that is of merit that means that your development is unacceptable. The biggest part of this is that they are introducing this into permitted development rights. That's the biggest thing, because the government is introducing or has introduced large parts of new opportunities for you to use as for PD. But what they are adding is that in certain parts, instead of the legislation saying this will be acceptable subject to the external appearance of the building, i.e. does it look good on the building, they're now going to change that to design codes, which is asking the council to be proactive to say, is this area okay for this type of development, yes or no? And then you have to stick to that, because what was happening is that line, subject to the external appearance of the building, was creating a whole opportunity for councils to say, is it the building, is it the townscape, is it the local area? And there's been appeals kind of testing that, and it's created this issue whereby a lot of otherwise acceptable development has been stopped because of that line, which, it's the devil is in the detail. So now it's going to say subject to a design code. So now councils will have to say, on this street or in this area, we accept this type of development but not this. So it gives assurance to you finally, so that when you go through the planning application process or the PD process, okay, I can use this PD because this design code says it's okay there, and then you can go about doing that. So now this will be slower than what I said to 4 years, 10 years rule, because it's one thing saying they must create a design code, but the creation of that design code is going to take a long time. There's no two ways about that. So even if law was passed and everything was set up today, councils will be written to by the government to say you must now create a design code, and there's going to be a whole consultation process. They may even get outsourced design teams to go and create the one for them. Point of the story is it's going to take a long time before those design codes are in place in every council. If you think there's over 300 councils, every council is going to have to do one. Now, however long that takes, I don't know, but it's going to take a long time, but it will have significant impacts on development, particularly with permitted development rights. The other thing now is that the government is saying that planning policies can only be used for locally specific matters. So that means that, right now every council has design policies, it has heritage policies. Now what the government is saying is that on nationally understood issues such as heritage, we're going to say these are the policies you need to refer to, i.e. you need to respect the character and the setting of the listed building or the conservation area, all those things. But your policies can only refer to very locally specific matters. It's just taking a little bit of control away from the council. It's basically reducing the amount of matters that council can consider an application on. If you have heritage matters, you have transport matters, and you have tree matters, that requires an expert in each one of those areas. And it's going to take a long time for that application to go through. And then every council has its own policies about, the intricacies of their own policies. But now the government is saying on certain matters, these are the policies, the national policies. And to my mind, it's just everything that they're proposing right now is just to streamline and just speed up the planning process and give assurance to people. So that's the big thing. Policies will only be locally specific now. The other one as well, which is all about pace, is they are looking at removing the Section 106. So right now, on certain applications, so an application will be determined, it'll be granted subject to a Section 106 agreement. Now that last bit, subject to a Section 106 agreement, can take an unnecessary amount of time, because basically all it is it's a contract, it's an agreement that says, okay, you've been granted planning permission, but now you must provide us with contributions for local transport network, or you must provide an affordable housing contribution. Now, more often than not, they are very, very boilerplate, right? But it takes a long time for that to go through, because it needs to go to the council's legal team, it needs to go to the applicant's legal team, and there's time lost in just the communication in between the two. When does it get signed, blah, 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 all that time. And it just takes too much time. So now they're introducing a standalone levy called the New Infrastructure Levy, which again is just going to make it more black and white as to what you need to provide as part of the application and what you don't. So that, again, when you apply, you have assurance, and it all happens quickly. And the fifth one is something called street votes. Street votes are this new part of legislation that is allowing local streets to set up street vote development orders. And what those do is they actually grant planning permission for certain streets. Now, it looks like there's local qualification criteria as to what's a street, who qualifies as to be a part of that street, to allow that street to create a street development order. But that's basically saying this street is saying that you can do planning permission on this area. What I think what it's trying to do is stop this kind of itty bitty types of development on streets, which causes so much fury in the planning system, whereby you get loads of local objection to a rear extension. But I think what it's saying is the street development order is like, we can have this we are happy with this type of development, and everyone must accord with that. So it sounds like it's almost like an outline permission for a street that everyone on that street conforms to, agrees to, and then you can build out to that. Now, I guess there's going to be a process whereby if you want to do something outside of that, you'll probably need a different type of consent, probably planning permission outside of a street development order or something to that nature. But it's an interesting one, and also interesting, like, this is something, if you buy a property, and in your research you'll then need to find out if it has a street development order on it, because you might have ambitions for what you want to do on a site, but a street development order might say you can only do this, and then we don't know what the process looks like for doing something else. But that could be a big consideration if you're thinking about that. So it's something I've not seen before, but that's what it is. Street development order. A local street is allowing you to have planning permission for certain types of development only. And lastly, this is a brand new one. So the context for this one is that there's been this whole issue of a developer's land banking. So they would get planning permission and they just will not build it out. Now, I've been in a committee myself where committee members have directly asked the applicants, like, are you going to build this out? This is a really good development. We want to make sure that you build it out. Now, leading up to the committee, we actually knew that developer had previous for not delivering things, but it was a great development, and at that time your decision can't be affected about whether or not you think that developer is going to build it out or not. There's no mechanism. Whereas now it looks like there is going to be something whereby if that developer has got previous instances of not delivering things, and I assume there's going to be some test for that, like 3 years, 2 years or whatever, if they don't deliver the permissions that they have been getting, then that may be a reason for refusal. So again, this is another thing to encourage people. If you're going to get planning permission, take it seriously, build it out. Otherwise, there is now going to be mechanisms in place that if you don't build it out, and if you just have this process of just selling permissions that no one builds, then we're going to stop you there. So there's a real focus now on, if you're going to get permission, you must deliver that. So those are the 6 things that I think are very relevant to people, and you must keep an eye on as the secondary legislation starts moving through, because they are going to have very, very clear day-to-day impacts on your experience of the planning system. Some of them, it'll be interesting to see how they come out. Some of them in theory sound really good. Some of them are quite tough. The 4-year and 10-year rule one, that's a big one you need to keep an eye out for. But I think everything's moving in the right direction. Development looks like it's going to happen quicker. As to those issues of councils having issues taken away from them in terms of having locally specific policies, we'll see how that works out. In theory, it sounds good from an applicant's point of view. I think councils will resist that. Some councils take a long time to deliver local plans, like planning policies, even from the previous governments. So for this to come in and then to say you now cannot refer to these matters, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But so that's what's going on. Keep a close eye on it, and if you want to learn more about how to use the planning system, learn more about the planning system for your own property ambitions, or you have a site that you want to develop and you want to know more about the planning system, click the link below to learn more, and you can start learning more about what planning officers seek, how councils review applications, what's the process, why do some things get permission, some other. I was a planning officer in my time, so I worked on the other side, and I understand what it is like within the council, and I understand why things get refused, why things get granted and others don't. So if you want to learn more about that process, then click the link below to learn more.